Can you introduce yourself and tell me what your profession has been and when you started?
My profession is an Alaska commercial fisherman, and my name is Michael Jackson. I've been fishing up in Alaska for 41 years, and I've fished in all sorts of different fisheries, but currently the only fishery I'm involved in is the Bristol Bay drift fishery.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like when you first got to Alaska? What were your impressions?
When I first got to Alaska, it was as wild as I'd hoped it would be, because I was as wild as I was. I was 18 years old and knew no limits, and that's what Alaska is good at, is letting you find your limits. I did whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, however often I wanted, and learned a lot along the way.
Well, that must have been entertaining for you and your friends and family.
For everybody involved, yeah, but I'm not alone. I think I'm one of whoever goes up there. Alaska is the land of misfits, and I fit right in as a misfit.
Mm-hmm. And you started fishing, which a lot of people do. And how did that happen?
I started fishing because where I went to school in Tacoma, Washington, there was a number of families that were fishing families, and they were friends, and they would go up and make money during the summers and come back. And I wanted to do that. After I graduated, I wanted to make some money. I had a climbing trip in mind that I wanted to pay for. So I went up, and once I did it, it wasn't for the money anymore. I mean, you can fish to make a living, but I found out right away that I was going to fish to make a life, and I have.
What did that mean to you? You know, what do you mean by making a life on the last frontier?
I think anytime you can be involved in passion in your life, you're going to live and you're going to be the best you. If you have passion involved with what you do, you're going to push the limits on what you do. You're going to be actively engaged and involved 24/7, 365. And that's what it did. I was young, I was healthy, I was surrounded by young, like-minded, healthy people. And for me, it was an adventure as much as it was a way to make money. And I never, ever felt like I was going to work. I felt like I was going on an adventure and coming back with money. And I was doing it with friends and meeting new friends. And it's no different now. I mean, there's different financial obligations, different limitations on what the body can do. Things have changed, but it's still an absolutely amazing place to go. There's just nothing like it. Nothing.
Tell me about Bristol Bay. Tell me about the fishery.
Have you ever been to Burning Man?
No, I haven't, but everybody I know has. It's just that I was working while they were getting high and doing what they do.
Okay.
You know?
What a Bristol Bay fishery to me is, never having been to Burning Man, but having seen films and talking to people, Bristol Bay is to fishing as Burning Man is to a festival. Everything is amplified to a level of craziness that is almost incomprehensible. The hours are insane. The weather is insane. The type of conditions you're put in working around different boats in close quarters is crazy, but somehow it all works. Through that whole frenetic maelstrom, it all just kind of filters out and works. And that's what it's like. There is no 2 days the same in Bristol Bay. And I've done lots of fisheries all over, and really Bristol Bay it's one off for just the extremes of what it is. Volumes of fish that come in a minute. You'll get 10,000 pounds of fish in 1 minute in your net. Where else does that happen? You'll have 10 boats within 100 feet of you bumping into you, trying to make the same set, get your net in the water that you're doing. Where else does that happen? But it all works. For some reason, it all works. It's Mother Nature at its absolute finest, and it's human nature at its absolute worst.
Wow. Well, I've been there and I was blown away. I'm sure we'll get into all that. Oh, tell me about the sockeye, because of all the species of the stocks of salmon, sockeye seem to be kind of the pinnacle of the culinary world and command the most price and things like that. And they're maybe in some ways the most unique to Alaska, because down in the lower 48, they'll spawn in lakes and things like that, and there's not as much production anymore.
Yeah, we've kind of taken care of their habitat down here. We've robbed them of the chance to thrive. But in Bristol Bay, they thrive they do. We're setting record runs, historical record runs. Sockeye do really well when they have diverse habitat, and Bristol Bay has, the habitat in Bristol Bay is incredible. A creek here, a stream there, a pool of water there, and all of it works together to give the diversity that the sockeye thrive in. And they're prized in the marketplace because of the color, the texture, and the flavor. And the color is ruby red, the texture is firm, and the flavor is wild. It is absolutely wild. They're plankton feeders, which gives them that red color. And because of that, the flavor you get from a sockeye is distinct and unique.
Aren't Chinook also plankton feeders?
Chinook are opportunistic. They'll take what they can get. And their flesh isn't firm in the same way. It's got more oil content, more fat content. So it's, a lot of people like that flavor. For me, it's a trade-off between the consistency of the meat and the flavor. And I prefer the firm flesh of the sockeye.
Do you have relationships with chefs, like in the lower 48 or in other places of the world that, you know, you either ship to or you talk with?
Chef Tom Douglas is I would say he's one of the biggest advocates for wild salmon, and particularly Bristol Bay wild salmon. He's a Seattle area chef with a number of restaurants, and he's been an advocate against Pebble Mine for years. He has invited me onto his cooking show a couple of times on the radio to bring down Bristol Bay sockeye and talk about it. And it's just it's a treasure that we have him in this area as an advocate for Bristol Bay and for sockeye. A number of other chefs I've been involved with in the Seattle area doing promotions for Bristol Bay sockeye. And then I am a direct marketer of Fall Line Fisheries, directly from me to you. And I deliver to restaurants and homes in the Bellingham and Western Washington region.
Back in the day, I don't know if anybody told you about me, but in my filmmaking life, I made a film on the Elwha River.
Sue told me that, yes.
Back before it was a possibility. In fact, one of my life lessons is that things that people call impossible are not necessarily impossible. It just it depends on your drive, your passion, your relentlessness,
your timeline.
Yeah, what time well, like you, when you started fishing, I started filming right at the optimum time when I was just like perfectly in shape and and really ready to handle everything. So I told Sue I hiked up to the glaciers, with a 60-pound pack and a French film camera on my shoulder, and the thought of doing anything remotely similar now is just not possible. I kind of think that I was crazy, a little crazy.
No, you weren't crazy. You were young, and that was the right thing at the right time. I get it.
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned the Pebble Mine in the context of the culinary market. Yes. And wow, that's really unusual. So down in Seattle, you have people that are involved in the restaurant business that are really concerned about a mine that's being built up there. So why are they concerned?
The mine that they're proposing in Bristol Bay is at the headwaters of the most productive sockeye river system in the world. As I mentioned earlier, we set records. Why are they concerned? Because what the mine proposal is for the largest open pit mine in North America, with a mine design that's never been tested in this kind of seismic terrain and hydrology. It's underwater and it's getting shaken. It's like trying to build a mine on top of a dryer in shake cycle. The risk reward ratio is just, it's unforgivable to even think about it. There is no way that this mine can survive. And so the chefs recognize that in order to sustain this wild run, they need to be advocates for this area. And so their motto is to save Bristol Bay, eat wild sockeye. Because the more people eat it, the more they get emotionally invested and the more they understand how special it is.
I read in the New York Times today that there's going to be a congressional investigation of the practices of permitting and the promises that were made, and they weren't necessarily coherent. And the article said they were speaking to two different audiences, and one of them was the 31 villages of Native people dependent on salmon for their sustenance around Bristol Bay, and the other is the investors.
Correct. Yeah, they peddle a 20-year mine plan to the Army Corps of Engineers and to the local residents, and they say it's a small footprint, but they never have had to do a financial feasibility study. A 20-year mine wouldn't even begin to pay for the infrastructure. So it's a bait and switch by a foreign mining company that has absolutely no intention of developing this mine. Their goal is to get the permit and to sell it off. And we, all of the fishermen, the fisherwomen, all of the locals, the subsistence fishermen, the sports people that come in, all of us are taking the risk for them to make money. And it's an unacceptable risk. There is no way they can justify this risk. The science that they're using to get the permit is junk science. It's been debunked by all major scientists that look at it that aren't getting a paycheck from the Pebble Limited Partnership. The data that they submit to the Army Corps of Engineers as fact is not peer reviewed. Their stream studies, their hydrology studies, they're their own scientists that do these and then submit it to the Army Corps of Engineers as fact. And the Army Corps, acting in collusion with Pebble Limited Partnership, is accepting this. They are ramrodding it through, so the process is fatally flawed. It's just been a travesty. To hear that that the two senators are operating in a way that's going to shed some light on how crooked this is just warms my heart, because the only way bad things happen is in the darkness. We need to bring this out to light so people can understand just how corrupt this is.
What is the foreign mining company that you're referring to, and where are they from? Can you tell us a little about their operating structure?
Parent organization that owns the Pebble Limited Partnership, which is the boots on the ground company, Pebble Limited Partnership, is called Northern Dynasty. It's a Vancouver, Canada-based company. Its only assets are this mine claim, and they've borrowed billions of dollars to get this thing up and running. And the past few years, a lot of that money, millions and millions of dollars, have gone towards lobbying efforts for congressmen and senators to kind of pave the way to look beyond the science and allow politics to get into the process. It's one of the last big fights that we have to protect one of the wonders of the world. And it breaks my heart to talk about it. It absolutely crushes me to realize that it's been 15 years we've been in this battle, and we're no better off. My sons at 21 and 18, who had fished with me for years since they were 11 and 13, they decided to get their own boating permit up in Bristol Bay. So they took out a loan, they struck out, and they did that based on the fact that they saw what kind of a life they had growing up. They loved being outdoors, they loved being in the wild, they loved harvesting a resource sustainably, they loved the people involved, everything about it they loved. And so for me, this Pebble mine fight took on a generational fight, because no longer, we weren't just fighting for myself or my kids, I'm fighting for their kids.
Yeah.
And their kids' kids. And so that is what I bring to the battle is this is generational. And I've been to Washington, D.C., talked to Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, senators from Washington, and that's the message that I bring to them is you may be bowing to pressure in the moment, but your grandkids will never forgive you if this mine goes in, because they will never get to see what we got to experience.
And we have just talked about the Elwha River. And it seems as if the moment that we're in right now is very similar to 1910 or 12, when non-local capital came into the region and investor interest did not take into account native populations or community values. And they promised something that they didn't deliver. They promised that they would put in fish ladders when the dam went in, but they did not have the technological expertise to build those fish ladders. That was actually the basis of the hatchery system in Washington. That was the precedent. So it didn't really take much to set a long-term precedent that affected many, many rivers.
And the trade-off is, what, has it been 100 years now?
It has been 110.
Trading cheap energy for a sustainable resource, which is exactly what they want to do with the Pebble mine in Bristol Bay. And you cannot trade a sustainable resource for harvesting a resource that will run out and leave permanent pollution. It's called forever mitigation. You have to mitigate that tailings pond forever. And once the money's gone out of the mine, what's the incentive for that mining company to maintain that mitigation, that forever mitigation? There is none.
Dude, you're
So
so
you've
right.
got,
This is like all my films rolled up into one, the way you're talking about. Because I went down to Mojave and they're building solar energy projects, or had been building them the last 5-10 years, meaning they're taking 5 to 10 square miles of land and grading it. So there goes your ecosystem, there goes your carbon sink, there goes your biodiversity, there goes your people, there goes your native landscape and your burials and villages and everything else. And they're breaking, I don't know how many countless laws. It seems to be an economic structure that is defeating environmental values at almost every turn in the United States.
it's environmental alcoholism. This time will be different. Mark Titus, a good friend of mine, created a film about this pebble mine called The Wild, and it chronicles his personal journey with substance abuse and how it parallels the ecological abuse and how you bargain with yourself and how it's going to be different this time. And it never is. It just never is. It's the same thing every time unless you decide to put a stop to it. All of the fishermen in Bristol Bay, the local populations, the sports people that come in, everybody is fighting this mine. Nobody wants it except a foreign mining interest. And unfortunately, the governor of the state of Alaska is resource driven, and he is all for this mine. He is pulling out every stop he can.
Well, the lesson on the Elwha for me was that progress isn't always what we think it is. And what they said about the Elwha, what my historical consultant said, was before science improved the river, you had entire communities deriving foodstuffs from that river and surviving depressions and recessions. But after science improved the river, there was nothing in that river that would contribute toward a subsistence lifestyle.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the Luddites weren't wrong. They weren't against anything. They were just warning that modernization was going to take away a way of life. And that's exactly what happens. You're trading off a way of life for a perceived convenience or perceived wealth that's short-term. And not only no, hell no. There's lots of me's. I'm a big guy. There are bigger guys than me, and we are in the way and staying in the way.
Can you tell me about the fisheries group that you are vice president of and board member of, and what that is, and what you...
You bet. I'm a board member on the Bristol Bay Regional Seafood Development Association, which is a marketing association for all the Bristol Bay drift fleet. There's 1,850 or so permits. And we self-assess ourselves a 1% tax. And with that tax, we take on marketing projects, we take on sustainability projects, such as studies on habitat restoration, run timing. We work on quality issues because we want to get the most value out of our fish so that our members can get the most return on their investment. So it's a marketing organization that does more than just market. And the past few years, we've taken a very hard stand and put a lot of money into legal battles against the Pebble Mine because that's the #1 concern for our members.
I see. And you said originally when we talked that 85% of the membership is highly concerned about the mine. Where do the other 15% come down? What are their perceived values?
I don't want to
Are they pro-business or pro-mining or pro-extraction in general, or how do you characterize?
I can't speak to them because I can't speak with them because we're so far apart. I can't find a middle ground with them. The arguments that I've heard is Alaska is a resource extraction state. This is a resource, we need to extract it. They don't read the science that I've read. They don't follow what's happening with the politics that's absolutely corrupting the project. And so I think that they see the worth as more taxes into the coffers and more money. And for me, there's not more money. There's less money. When you have to pay forever remediation, you go backwards in a hurry. Look at the state of Washington. Why do you think Senators Cantwell and Senator Murray are leading the fight against Pebble Mine? They're leading the fight. You know why? Because they've seen what happened in Washington. with the mines. Habitat restoration costs millions and billions of dollars. How about habitat protection? That costs nothing but willpower. And that's what we need, is that willpower to keep fighting and get permanent protections for Bristol Bay.
Well, it's wonderful that you have that clarity, and unfortunately, based on a lack of clarity in the past and an awful lot of destruction. What do your sons think about this? I mean, how is it different? Is it different at all for that generation, or is everybody sort of in lockstep across generations?
They're against the mine. I don't want to speak to them as far as activism level because they're not me. They don't have that same personality. So they are far more intelligent than I am, but they're far less vocal. So how they help out is different than how I help out.
Mm-hmm. Your interview is going to be seen in New York, for starters, and distributed outward from there. So we're talking about a group of people who sometimes don't have much exposure to the natural world. And we've talked about the Elwha quite a lot. What would you say to them as far as the relevance to their lives living in an urban environment and being farther away from a place like Washington or Oregon or Alaska, Montana, you know?
That's a really good question, because I've traveled throughout the country in the fight against Pebble Mine, trying to make it relevant to people that you're describing that don't have that similar shared experience. And I'm trying to get an emotional attachment with them so that they can understand. So instead of me telling, when I'm in front of people, I'll ask what's important to them. I'll ask, what is it that feeds your soul? And if I get a hand or two and trickle up, and I'll go, what if that was threatened? What if that was threatened forever and it didn't have to be? How does that make you feel? And that starts to get the lights going and the conversation could come up. So what I would tell people in New York City is it's no different than if they decided that Central Park really, really, really needed to be turned into a parking lot. And I'm sorry, but we know better. And it's really important that we do this. And the parking fees are going to go to this company that I own. And, I'm really sorry, but that's just the way it's going to be. Alaska is a resource extraction state, and they're all about trying to get the worth out of the land and the waters, fishing, mining, logging. But there's certain elements within those different resource extractions that recognize that they need to make it generational and sustainable. And so some of the laws that have been enacted recently are gearing towards that. It's not just take it and run. It's, hey, look, we want to plant again. We want to keep fishing here. So I think there's an increasing awareness about the environmental stewardship. And I think the youthful generation, like my sons and young men and women their age, they recognize that that's where they fit in, is kind of shepherding that environmental stewardship and finding a voice for that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, they certainly have a highly motivating dad.
Motivation's one thing, intelligence and direction is another. So they've got the second two, I've got the first.
Mm-hmm. And well, you ran through a lot of things to think about. Can we digress or progress a little bit and give me just a slice of a description of a day in the life of a commercial fisherman?
In Bristol Bay?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're allowed to fish based on the biology of the run. We have area managers, and they determine the maximum sustainable yield. So they'll see how many fish are in a river system at one time, and they'll say, okay, there's 10,000 fish. Of those 10,000, we need 5,000 to get up the river. So I figure if we open it for 5 hours, 5,000 fish will get up the river, and you guys can take the other 5. So I'm going to open it from 5 a.m. till 10 a.m. Okay? Ready? Go. So for 5 hours, we get to fish. And that's just an abstract number. That's not real. And those numbers are not real. I'm just giving you an example of how it's managed. It's based on biology and window openings to take advantage of our ability to take the maximum sustainable yield. So you're fishing, and sometimes the fish are just in one area, a really small area. And so you're all forced to compete in close quarters to get these fish because they don't line up and take numbers like at an ice cream store. They're trying to get up the stream to go do their jobs, and your job is to intercept them. So it can be absolutely crazy in how quick things happen and how fast the fish move through. So you have to have your gear properly maintained. You have to have your crew well fed, rested, right attitude. Um, it's just everyone's operating at peak levels. Did you ever see the
It's kind of like filmmaking.
Did you ever see the
Right,
film Spinal?
you set at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you got so much light, and there's a client there, and
Exactly right.
it rained
And
pretty quickly, and your talent's got a hair problem, and you got to make it happen.
you can't tell the fish I'm tired. Wait, I'll be back in 4 hours. It's like Spinal Tap. Remember the movie Spinal
Yeah.
Tap when the amplifiers got 11? The guy goes, "Well, why do you have 11?" He goes, "Well, it's one more than 10, isn't it?" And that's what Bristol Bay is like. It's always at 11. Everything's 11.
Mm-hmm.
It's just extreme. And so you have to be prepared for the extreme. Spare parts, spare nets, plenty of food, and still things go crazy. And because things happen so quickly, and because it's such a compressed fishery, if you have a breakdown or if somebody gets hurt, 1/10 of your year's earnings could be gone if you miss one day's fishing. So it's a crucible. You really have to stay focused and be prepared. And a lot of people they don't function well with that sort of thing, but I'm so old and I've done it for so long that for me it's second nature. That doesn't mean I don't get frustrated when things go sideways, because I do and they do. But I try to anticipate as much as I can and have contingency plans in place. So it's a chess game while you're doing battle, if that makes sense. It's a mental battle as much as it's a physical battle.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the sockeye themselves. I mean, we went into that a little bit, but they're really unique creatures, and they go away looking a little different than they come back. And what is their life cycle?
Well, that's a good question. I was just on the phone with some biologists today. There's different ways they come back. Like some of them will stay inside the river system for 2 years, and then they'll go out in freshwater for 1 year and come back. Some of them will go out in the ocean. Some of them will stay in the freshwater for 1 year and then go out in the ocean for 3 years. So it's a 3-4 year cycle, and they go out as little fry and they come back as 6 to 9 pound beautiful chrome blue-backed amazing fish. They're just I just get chills thinking about it. They're just wonderful, wonderful species to be involved with. They're vital, they're hardy, and when they get into fresh water, they start to lose that chromy color. All of their energy now isn't going into feeding anymore. It's going into trying to go up to spawn and create the next generation. So they'll start to lose their color. They'll start to lose their chrome, and they'll turn red, and they'll develop a hump on their back, and they just kind of transform in front of you, and it's no different than a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's just as beautiful. Different outcome. They don't fly, they float.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been there on places like the Brooks River, and you see a run of salmon, and they're usually followed by brook trout or something like that on some of the rivers. So there's a bunch of species that kind of interoperate in the same
Feed on
space.
the eggs, you bet. Symbiosis, yep.
Mm-hmm. Can you just explain a little bit about like what you see, what it looks like when everything's going off? You've got bears and birds and trout and salmon and.
I think I mentioned it. It's nature's perfect. It's perfect. Everything is perfect up there. The birds that flock in the light, and it's dark and then it's light, and at the same time you're seeing a whale jump, and then at the same time the seals are feeding along your net as the fish are jumping, and the light's absolutely amazing. It's just nature at its perfect height. Everything is perfect as it should be. How can we interrupt that? How can we change that in
So
any good conscience?
what does that do for your soul? I mean, does that give you like the feeling of like?
I told you,
Yeah.
I can make a living doing.
Sometimes I ask you twice because there's a couple of different ways to say it, and you're really doing well. And I love the emotion that you have about it and the description. I mean, you read the great nature writers, and they're talking about, it's the feeling of the participation and the understanding of things. And I think that's just wonderful about what you're saying.
It's just an agreement.
What's the agreement?
I agree to respect the area. It nourishes me.
How long are you going to keep doing it?
I have a 13-year-old son. I'm dying with my boots on. So I can't quit.
How old are you now?
Dog years or human years? 59.
So you're a little younger than I am.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of the same view of land and changes and things like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not going to apologize for being emotional. It's a special spot. And I wish people could just feel what I get to feel for 2.5 months a year, just for a day to understand why people do this and go there. It's just, I am just honored to be there.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I don't know what more to ask you. I mean, you just gave me your heart and soul. So it's not really about information, necessarily.
It's a very emotional time. The record of decision by the Army Corps of Engineers is due out any day. And it's a thumbs up or thumbs down whether the mine gets the permit. And it's been such a corrupt system. We are all just on pins and needles right now, all of us.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So that's the one question I didn't ask you. What's going to happen? Because you mentioned any day.